Welcome to another episode of Brushing Up. In this episode, we're talking about the greeting card industry, specifically about how to get started as a greeting card designer and what sort of steps you can take. We talked a little bit about this before, but there's so much still to talk about. And Cody, you're going to start us off with a little intro on the greeting card industry.
Yes. So the greeting card industry is a multi-billion-dollar global market that has shown resilience even in the digital age. So in the US alone, it's estimated to be worth around 7 to 8 billion annually. That's crazy. So despite the rise of digital communication, physical greeting cards remain popular for their personal touch and emotional value. The industry is dominated by a few major players like Hallmark and American Greetings, but there's also a thriving market for independent designers and smaller companies. Cards are sold through various channels, including specialty card shops, big box retailers, supermarkets, and online platforms. The industry follows seasonal trends with major holidays like Christmas, Valentine's Day, and Mother's Day. However, everyday occasions like birthdays and thank yous provide a steady year-round demand. And in recent years, there's been a growing trend towards more personalized, artisanal, and niche cards, opening up opportunities for independent designers. The industry is also adapting to changing consumer preferences with eco-friendly options and integration with digital elements like QR codes. So despite challenges from e-cards and social media, physical greeting cards continue to hold a special place in how people connect and express emotions. It's still very much going. Physical cards.
Yeah.
I know my entire family, that's a must for everyone and is getting a card for everyone for all the different occasions.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say the same is true in the UK?
I would say for my family in the Netherlands, there's definitely a tradition of that as well. And I was going to say, I'm not surprised that it's still going so strong. Basically, there's still such a demand for artisanal stuff and things on paper. And greeting cards, as an example, it's such a nice way of still sharing stuff by hand, but in a really small format, and usually at a low cost. And it's a really nice way also from our perspective as designers, as illustrators, to share our work, but in a really small version. I'm not surprised at all. But it's good to know, especially for people who might want to start in the industry and are saying, like, is there any money to be made? Is it still even worth doing this? I think this shows it absolutely is.
What is your experience as an independent designer as it relates to greeting cards? Have a class out about greeting cards.
Yes, I have absolutely no idea about the world of licensing. We recently recorded a Q&A about your experience and exactly what you know about that side of the industry. I have absolutely no idea, but I have made greeting cards like collections for clients independently, basically. And I've also, over the years, I've made little collections like on my own, printed it myself, and then sold those at independent markets. So everything locally, pretty much. And then for clients, those were like digital collections, and they would print on for businesses and restaurants and stuff like that as well. So it's a very different perspective than your experience, because your background is more as an art buyer, right? And then later on as an independent designer as well.
Yeah, I actually started out doing templates for a national photo lab, and they were more in the niche market, very personalized photo cards, which is very niche and very much into personalization, which is definitely a growing trend I've been seeing for a while now. Yeah, I have a lot of experience in that. And then it turned into, eventually I was an art buyer, acquiring art for those photo products. So that's how I transitioned to it. And then when I went into surface pattern design, doing my own business in surface pattern design, I have been trying to work towards licensing my art for greeting cards. I've been finding some difficulty. I thought it'd be a lot easier than it has been, but I think it's the way it goes with just licensing your artwork in general. Just because you may be good in one niche area does not mean it's necessarily going to translate into all these other areas. That it's just like with any other category of licensing that you go into, it's going to have its challenges.
Mm-hmm. In general, starting any kind of venture as a designer or an illustrator, it's going to come with difficulties, I think. We're going to talk about that later as well, what is actually really difficult, the most difficult parts of this industry, for sure. I was going to ask you, what exactly are photo cards and how are they different from greeting cards?
Photo cards, you design them so that someone can personalize them with their own photos. So I actually, in the beginning of my career, started out designing magazines. So I associate a lot with like designing a layout or like a page of a magazine. It translates well to designing photo cards because you're designing like the front and maybe the back. And so you're trying to decide where like you want the images to be and your illustrated elements or designs, whether it be lettering or font that you're using. So I think it differs from traditional greeting cards in that that's more of illustration. You still have a header where you have like your like Happy Mother's Day or Happy Birthday, but there's no photos involved in that. It's purely just illustration in the header with that's either lettered or a font.
Okay, I see. But still, the final output of a photo card would be a greeting card, right? That would be the format.
Yeah, it's just definitely more personalized. So it also will usually contain personalized information. So I also, depending on what category I'm designing for example, if it's for a graduation card, like an announcement that you're announcing someone's graduating from either high school or college, you want to design based on what high school or school information that they have, what year they graduated. It's actually going to have a lot. Sometimes you'll want to leave design for the invitation details. It's going to have a lot more information that the user will personalize with their own information. Whereas the greeting card, it can be personalized like the inside, but it's more with the intent that it's going to be handwritten. It could have like message that you might have in the inside of a greeting card that you might work with a greeting card company that might help you with coming up with the personalized message that they'll have inside the card. But sometimes you can also come to them with the idea of what little message, but it's not so personalized that someone can change it with their own information or their own name, for example.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that type of thing is something that they would write personally in the greeting card.
So for you, you started doing the photo cards and then you transitioned into doing greeting cards. What was that like to then start really focusing on doing more what you have with greeting cards, the hand lettering, the illustration? What was that like?
It was definitely kind of like a switch and without having to think about the photos being integrated in a way. And when you're thinking in working one way for so long, it becomes easier. And this way you're thinking of almost like a full composition, like artwork with greeting cards and how you're going to compose, like how all that's going to work together. And then also they're more themed based with illustrations that you're coming up with, I think. So with the subject of what you're drawing, you really with photo cards want the photos to shine and the personalized information that the person would be inputting to shine the most, with everything else supporting those photos. With a greeting card, it's your illustration that's going to be catching the eye of people when they're like viewing them out in the world to look at them to see if they would resonate with whoever they're buying them for. So it's more of the image that you have to concentrate on. So you have to think of what you would more traditionally think of with making a really and resonating piece of artwork. And I would say that what it makes it different from your more traditional artwork is that with greeting cards, you'll want it to include like a headline, either typography or hand lettering, at whatever season you're creating it for.
From my perspective, to start with greeting cards was a little different because I was already illustrating other stuff and then realized greeting cards is basically a smaller version of that. And it's a really nice way to practice your illustration in combination with hand lettering. So it just made sense. And I would say as well that for people who are not sure if they could do greeting cards, it's actually perfect for practicing your illustration skills and your lettering, even as a beginner, because you're doing it on a small size. Usually there's not a whole lot of lettering because it doesn't fit and you don't want that. It's going to be a short message. And you're focusing more on the theme and the message than having it be perfect and beautiful. And actually the quirkiness and the imperfect works really well on greeting cards because humor gets you really far. So it's a really great way to practice your skills on a small size. And if you make a mistake, maybe people won't even notice.
Yeah, I agree. It is a really good way of using the hand lettering and the illustration parts all together.
So if we're talking about building a portfolio, if you're getting started with greeting cards and you want to show off your work or maybe do some passion projects, some personal projects to show off in your portfolio, what would you suggest in terms of number of designs and what would you use for pitching potentially to clients?
I think you could really pitch as low as one. If you're definitely just only want to concentrate on greeting cards and you have a really solid greeting card illustration ready to go, you can just start from there because it really only takes one to break into with building a relationship with a company. But if you want to start pitching in general, I think having a small collection of maybe 3 to 5 is a good way to go. Just make sure that you're maybe hitting all of the most popular holiday seasons that are sell and do the best in greeting card market.
So that shows that you can cover all the bases, or you've worked in each theme at least once, right?
That or just as a good strategy because those are the ones that sell the best. So if you get one in one of those markets, then those are the ones that they're looking the most art for and that also sell the best for them. And they're also usually the ones that are the most popular, they're going to require the most art for. So you have a better chance of getting your work accepted as well. On the other hand, there's a lot of people who are going to be submitting art for those categories as well. But I would say, yeah, just make sure you hit some of those more popular seasons and categories and just to start small from there to get ready to start pitching.
And you mentioned before that you use a sell sheet. Specifically, what is it and what does that look like for you? Like, how do you set that up? Because that's related to having a portfolio, right?
Yes. So portfolio work, I will put it at the very end of it. Like once I've finalized and everything, I'll put it in a sell sheet. And that basically is just 11 by 17 document that I set up in InDesign. And it just is a way to showcase your artwork. And it has my contact information. So it has my brand logo, it has my email address, my website, and I'll put the name that I've given. But some people, they'll use like SKU numbers. However you name and organize your files, you'll want to put that information there. And that's essentially what I send out on pitching is those sell sheets.
So a sell sheet is like a really quick overview of what you can offer a client when you're pitching, right?
Yeah. So if you have, for example, if you created work in like a mini collection, you'll show like your hero print bigger with your coordinating and Blender prints, a little bit smaller thumbnails, however you lay it out on that document that best shows that collection of images thematically that go together. But for example, for greeting cards, I'm just going to show the one main image on the sell sheet when I'm sending them out for pitching.
Okay. And especially with the sell sheet, because it is a limited size, you're really showing just a few pieces, right? I think what you're saying is like quality over quantity. Like you pick your best pieces and just like a quick overview. Or what would you suggest here?
Always definitely like want to have the best quality stuff that you're sending out. And if you find that it's not gaining traction or if your pitching's not really working, it's hard to say how you can tell if your pitching's working or not because most of the time it's hard to even hear back from anyone. But that's when you can use your accountability people and also asking the communities that you're part of what they think of the work. And that's when you can start assessing whether or not you need to make small tweaks or if it's just not as good quality and it's maybe something you need to retire, which is something I've actually done. You can do kind of like portfolio audits yearly is a good practice to do is look at your work and see if you made something that's really on trend, but you might notice that trend's not as big anymore. It might not be relevant anymore to keep in your portfolio. So that's a good time when you do those audits and when you assess your work to realize that maybe the quality is not up. And so it's definitely better to always, especially when you're pitching, to pitch even a smaller quantity of stuff if it's really high quality than it is to send a bunch of stuff that's just not as good quality because it's going to leave a better impression if it's fewer stuff but higher quality than it is for lots of stuff that's not as good.
I think in general for portfolio, that's the golden rule, right? Because you don't want to overwhelm someone looking at it, that they might not have the time to look at hundreds of pieces. But also, I think it shows your sense of curation. It shows that you know what to pick from all the things that you've made, what is most important and what has the most value. And it shows your confidence, I think. This is my work. This is my 3 to 5 pieces. And that's all you have to see, because I'm confident in that this is my best work.
That's a really good point with curation. That's a really good skill to have, especially with portfolio building.
Yeah, but what you mentioned about collections, that I find so interesting because I love working in collections. I think it's such a nice way, also for greeting cards, to show that, let's say, instead of making one piece, one greeting card alone, you make a collection of 2, 3, 4, or 5 pieces. And that, I think, can also show to a potential client that you know how to take one theme and then turn that into multiple pieces. So it could be a theme based around just the holidays. It doesn't have to be something very specific, but just to show how you take one theme or one color palette or one composition and then turn that into multiple pieces. I think that is so valuable for potentially a client that wants to license your work or hire you to make more greeting cards.
I agree, to be able to reformat something, especially if you know that it's going to resonate well or it's going to sell very well. That's a really good skill to have and to show. In addition to curating, it's really good to be able to take an idea, but also reformat it for other different seasons. So if you have something that does really well for Mother's Day, for example, turn that into a good holiday one, and it could do really well for that as well.
Oh, yeah. That's a really good idea, especially I think when you're starting out with a portfolio. When you're a beginner and you have no idea where to start and you really just want to get something out there, you're probably still in the phase of developing your unique point of view, your style a little bit. And then working in that way is going to get you so much further. You're going to get so much work out there instead of struggling with focusing on one piece and then putting all that energy again into another piece. While to move quicker, you could just put all your energy, instead of into one piece, into 3 pieces, for example. It will get you much further, I think.
I actually have a Happy Spring illustration that I've done a long time ago, and I've noticed it's one of my most pinned pieces on Pinterest, and it just says Happy Spring. And I've thought I really need to do some different lettering that's other than Happy Spring, because I bet that would do well if I were to do it for Happy Mother's Day or thank you or something like that, than just Happy Spring. Because when you just have it as like right now as it is with just Happy Spring, it's really limiting. And then you might also want to consider changing the colors to match whatever season or category you're wanting to reformat it for. But yeah, that is definitely something that's really also good to consider when you're building your portfolio and doing those portfolio audits. Like, you probably have a lot more work in your portfolio than you think of if you view it in that lens.
Yeah, it just makes small adjustments to the work you already have and it's ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So something else that I think comes up a lot when, in general, building a portfolio, also for greeting cards, is how do you find a balance between what is uniquely your perspective, your point of view, versus what is in right now, what is trendy, what the market might demand, especially for greeting cards, because that can move quite quickly, right?
Really tricky across the board, not just with greeting cards, because I think, especially if when you're starting out, you like, oh, I want my style. Something it seems like all illustrators aspire to have is a unique style. And I don't really think you get that unless you do a lot of work. And a lot of times you might not even really see it until after a while. So I think it's just more about making sure that you just keep consistently creating work, and then also paying attention to those trends that come along. And if something grabs your attention that really resonates with you, something you want to create, then that's great. Create something that goes along with the trend. I myself have a little database that I keep track of. And really, when you're noticing trends, it's really all about just noticing basically reoccurring themes and subject matters that you see popping up while you're out shopping or while you're online looking
Hmm.
at stuff. Pop culture, that type of stuff while you're watching TV. That's how you can spot trends over time. And so I have a little database that I keep track of. If I'm like, oh, I really noticed this motif theme lately. I'll make note of it. And that's also really good because then I can go back to that later if I need an idea of something I want to draw. It's an inspiration library right there.
That's a great idea. I like that. I think also what we tend to forget, or maybe when we're thinking about this, about style, about personal style, is that we're thinking about visually, aesthetically, but it's also about what you decide to use as a theme, right? Or how you decide to curate content, context. I don't really know the right word for this, themes. So the kind of stuff that you want to put on the greeting card, like what message goes on there. For example, what does really well is humor, just putting jokes on there, memes as well. They do surprisingly well on greeting cards. So that's also a way that you can connect with people and show off your unique point of view.
Humor is a really good way to utilize in greeting card design and illustration because it instantly resonates with people. So that is definitely really good to do. And I know that you have a lot of experience with that and also with puns and with your greeting card designs in particular as well. From what you've written about with puns, there's one article that, or there's a couple actually that you've written on my blog. And those are, I think, one of my most read, I've noticed blog posts, is those ones on puns. I think it's like math. It transcends language, transcends cultures and everything is when you can connect with them with humor.
Yeah, that's so funny. I remember us talking about how you can use puns in lettering and greeting cards, and I don't know, I guess it resonates with people. But that's so funny because I honestly did not think that it would. I started that sort of during the pandemic, where I was designing little cards with little basic illustrations that later on were like perfect for a greeting card format. But that's not initially what I was thinking of. I just started these little chalkboards with sayings on them as if they would be on the street, for example, because actually that's what I used to do a lot more of, like doing actual hand-painted chalkboards. So I was like, while we're still stuck inside, let me just do those digitally. And I just took puns as a way to put something on the chalkboard and just things that I thought were funny. And it seemed to resonate with people so much that later on I got hired to do that kind of stuff, also like in real life on actual chalkboards. And that's something that's also that I wanted to say about personal style. I wasn't really thinking about doing it all about puns and only working with that, but somehow that's what stuck, or that's what people talk to me about on Instagram. Like, oh, you're the girl with the puns, and I was like, I guess so. It just happened, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be about you only work in a certain color palette or something that's like visually has to be you. It could just be what you decide to put on greeting cards and how you curate the stuff. And it could just stick to you. Puns, they stuck with me. There it is.
There's tons of illustrators, they only focus on florals, for example. All of that goes into developing your style.
Exactly. And what about adding extra embellishment without feeling forced? What do you mean?
That is something when I was transitioning from photo cards to greeting cards that I had trouble with because early on I knew even back in school when I was studying design that my designs and my illustrations tended to reflect who I was, who I am as a person. I'm a quiet person in general. And it was noted early on that my designs tend to be quiet. That was actually hard for me when it came to transitioning to creating illustrations and designs for greeting cards because it seemed, from at least from what I noticed, a lot of the ones that get picked up tend to have a lot of extra embellishment on them. And so it was difficult for me to think of how I can add extra embellishment. But at the same time, I think you can run into the trap if you don't have that issue on almost doing too much in greeting card design and coming up with a composition. And so it's really about finding that balance. And I know for myself, I tend to not do enough. And it's about making sure that you do just enough so it's not forced. So not too much, but not too little. The Goldilocks.
Yeah, finding the right balance between the two. But I think that's why greeting cards are
Yeah.
perfect, because it is a small size. So it teaches you how to work with the size that you have, which is just really small. So for people who tend to do too much, this is a really good practice. Less is more, or working with the scale that you have with your lettering, how to make that work and make it still legible. And for people who tend to work a little bit with less, this is a way to fill up the space that you have, finding the right balance. So we talked a little bit about market trends and how you find them. If we're just talking about what kind of themes are popular, what should people definitely be thinking about when building a portfolio? What is the most important theme?
Christmas is always really, really popular. But I actually just got an email from one of the greeting card companies that I'm on their list for, and they actually said that birthdays their biggest category, which before I got that and noted that, I would have said is the second most popular. But I think traditionally across most licensing categories, Christmas holiday is generally noted as the most popular. But yeah, I would say in light of just seeing that, I knew it was really up there birthday, but maybe for cards, it's becoming even more so something that's more popular.
Okay, interesting. I really did think it was holidays too, because there's just so much around that you can do. But yeah, birthdays. Okay. That's a good thing to keep in mind then when building a portfolio, at least.
With birthdays, if you think about it, it's something that you can make money on all year round. So it's an evergreen theme that you can create work for.
Yeah.
Whereas holiday, even though it's one of the most popular in general, even for greeting cards, but also across surface pattern design and licensing, it's only for one season. So
Yeah.
I would say for the season, holiday and Christmas would generally be stated as the most popular. But if you're thinking of evergreen, what's going to make you money all year round, birthday is definitely the way to go. So I think to cover all your bases, do both.
That makes a lot of sense. What are some other popular themes or seasons that people could think about?
Thank yous are really good. Mother's Day is a really popular season. I think it might be next after birthday. Yeah, so Mother's Day first season, and then if you're thinking another evergreen, thank yous are real big. I know get wells are up there too. Yeah, I would say those are off the top of my head the big ones.
I was thinking as well of specific festivities like Halloween or Easter, but then I think maybe greeting cards in general are not, it's maybe just not that time if they don't sell as well. Because obviously with birthdays, there's gift giving and holidays gift giving, but so greeting cards just make a lot more sense.
I would say in general for greeting cards, that everyday category is a big one because they're more all season long, all year long. So that every day includes thank you, blank. That's usually more like art-based cards that have blank inside. Friendship, congratulations, wedding, baby, sympathy, and then I mentioned before, get well. So that everyday category is actually really good to get artwork for because that encapsulating everyday theme is really something they're going to be needing, and that will sell well all year round. But Halloween, those smaller like Thanksgiving holidays they're more feeding. So while they still need them at the time, they're generally not going to be taking as many of the art. I knew that was the case when I acquired art when I was an art buyer for those smaller categories that we realized they didn't sell quite as well when we would need art for it, whether we needed to refresh the art because we hadn't had new art in a while. We wouldn't get nearly as much art as we would for those seasons that are much bigger, like graduation and holiday. Every single year, we would be acquiring art from everyone that we had contracts with that we had worked with in the past for those two categories. But when it came to those smaller categories, it was much smaller list of the go-to artists, and it'd just be a lot smaller amount of art required for it. So I think it's also the same when it comes to greeting cards as well, for the differences between very seasonal holidays and those everyday categories.
I think you could also just see in online greeting card stores what is more popular. I know of one that's really popular in the UK, Thoughtful, I actually have a few cards on there myself as well, and you can clearly see what's popular, what kind of themes do really well. And I think that's a great way to familiarize yourself with the industry. Let's say you're looking around for trends, you're finding inspiration, checking what sort of themes are popular. Where could you look? What are some like big greeting card shops out there?
When I'm looking for myself, I am looking where I'm actually regularly shopping. So those supermarkets, those tend to be the big box stores. But if I'm ever in my local downtown area, for example, there's a lot of specialty shops and a lot of them have huge selections of cards. And that's where you'll find your more independent artists and designers who have their own greeting card lines where they're actually producing the cards themselves and selling them to retailers. I would say either of those places are really great places to look just when you're out and about living your life. Just take note of everything around you and noting those trends and popular themes that are popping up. I would say in terms of the big box stores and the more popular places is more great for assessing what is more popular for mass consumers. Those small specialty shops, it's definitely more for a niche customer. So
Yeah.
generally those types of stores are people who shop there, they love the handmade, they love those small batch type things,
Yeah.
artisanal. And then in terms of pitching your work to places, it's good to keep that in mind as well, making sure that your artwork is a great fit for wherever you're pitching your work to.
Okay, that's a good tip. What I like as well about going to stores, independent shops that have greeting cards, is just seeing what the cards actually look like physically, because what we mostly do, at least both of us, we illustrate digitally mostly. So it's going to be most of the time on a screen, and you're not really going to keep in mind as much what it actually looks like on paper. And it's just a really nice way to see physically what the greeting cards look like. How are they printed? What kind of material or paper do they use? I love finding greeting cards that have cool cutouts, the florals and little cutouts, for example, or when they emboss the paper, for example. It's just a really nice way to see all the options that you have as an artist.
That reminds me, there's actually one company that I'm on the list for when they do an open call for art for their greeting cards. They will say this is for this type of card that we're looking art for. And so one of them will be where it's specifically for people to give cash. So it's like more of a long vertical card. And then they'll actually also say, oh, we're also looking for art for a pop out too. So artists can keep in mind if they have anything that would work well for that type of format of a card. So that's a really great point to talk about is if you go into creating artwork, or sometimes I don't like having those type of constraints. Sometimes I feel like it overcomplicates, but once you have a piece of artwork done, you can also look at it and be like, oh, this would be great in mind for whatever format, or you can use it to keep in mind for whenever you're starting something as well.
I like that you mentioned pop-out cards, because that is a whole different skill in itself. But as artists, obviously, we're so creative. We can do all these things. You're not necessarily tied down to making a folded card and that's it. It can be something that pops out, or like origami or something really cool. We can do anything nowadays with printing, so there's lots of options there. I think there's also specifically so many illustrators that focus specifically on doing greeting cards, or like only lettering on greeting cards, only pop-outs greeting cards.
I've followed some artists who all they do is just lettering or greeting cards, and it's not a lot of the illustration, it's just pure lettering.
Something else to keep in mind when designing greeting cards is your target demographic. How important is that? And can you explain a little bit more about this?
I think it's really important. Let's start with the target demographic. It's women aged 35 to 60. And the reason is a lot of times it's women who are making the purchasing decisions. And so whenever you start in design, illustration, you should always try to keep your target market in mind whenever you're creating something, because that's who you're selling to. That's your end buyer. So you always want to make sure that you're considering that whenever you're creating something, because that's more likely to be picked up by whoever is acquiring the art, and
Yeah.
then ultimately on the final end product, who's going to be buying it and how well it does.
So you're saying target demographic, that is the biggest group of buyers for greeting cards, average.
Yeah.
Okay. I had no idea.
Yeah, they're the ones that are making those purchasing decisions of those cards, is women in that age range.
I honestly had no idea because from my experience as selling on markets, it looks very different because, I mean, it's a lot more focused. It's a lot more like a smaller group. So it all depends on who's coming to that market and then who's buying from there. What I noticed with the greeting cards that I was selling is it was younger people that were attracted to it because they saw the jokes and they're like, oh, that's funny. I know someone who wants that, or I can give that to you, for example. So for me, I would say, for example, it was a lot younger. So maybe it could also depend a little bit on...
That may be the case, actually, with those independent shops and artisanal type shops. It does seem like it is more that younger consumer that's coming in. It would make sense also that humor type stuff that is very pop culture would resonate with them.
I would love to see the statistics of, for example, online greeting card shops. How did they sell? Who did they sell to? That would be interesting to see, because that would give us a lot of info.
It probably depends on also whether it's an online retailer or not. Well,
Yeah.
I know in photo cards it was women. It was about the same demographic because, yeah, they're the big purchasers we found in looking at the sales of everything. I would also say that statistic is probably more what you'd see for more of a mass consumer customer.
That makes sense. So it's going to depend on what kind of stuff you're making and where you're putting it, right? Like online or offline, like what kind of demographic it's going to be.
Yeah. Whether you're selling in person. Let's talk about how to create relatable and heartfelt designs.
Yes, let's do it.
I think generally the way you've talked about how you started doing puns and humor is a great way immediately to start being relatable. And I know one, Emily McDowell, she's huge into the sympathy category of cards, and she set a new standard for how sympathy greeting cards were before. They're all very traditional. I don't know if traditional is the right way to say it, but they're very somber. I guess maybe that's the best way to say it. Hers brought humor into sympathy cards and a lot more modern, fresh take on it. And it revolutionized that whole card category. What she was doing was so different from what everyone else did. And that was all through humor. And I also think being really authentic.
Yeah.
Either your writing of your messages and also even the way you create your illustrations is also another way to make your art relatable in greeting cards.
I think in general, that's why humor works well, and also simpler illustrations, because you don't want things to be perfect, especially when it's about a heartfelt message. Lightening it up and lightening the tone works really well because it connects to people. If it's this perfect, beautiful thing, no one can really relate to that, and it doesn't really sometimes work with the message that the card has to communicate.
I think, going back to what you said before with it doesn't have to be perfect. I think when you bring more of your quirkiness and imperfections into something like greeting cards, especially, it is another way of making your work more relatable and resonating with people.
Yeah.
Because I think that's how you show your authenticity. And that's what people, I think, really gravitate towards.
Yeah.
They want to see themselves reflected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be, how do I explain this? Sort of like so imperfect that it's ironic. Like it doesn't have to be like a meme and that's it, but it's just something that just has a quirkiness to it. It can also just be something that's more cute or feels a little bit whimsical, and that's something that can translate really well as well. Something nostalgic, that works too.
Yeah.
I have found that for me that kind of came naturally because I was already focusing on doing slightly more retro designs. I like illustrations from the 1960s, 1970s, old children's books from that time, for example. If you think of Disney films from that time as well, the backgrounds with all the wonky lines and the little decorations. That is something that speaks to people as well because it has a sense of nostalgia. There should be a psychological paper written about this because there's something about that that connects to people. You can go that route, find something that connects to people in a nostalgic way or an authenticity in quirkiness. I don't know. There's many different ways to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Nostalgia is a really good thing. I think that's why it's been trending and it hasn't been a long time, but I don't see it going anywhere. And I think that the reason that is because nostalgia is immediately a thing that people can see themselves in. The people want to see messages that they relate to, that they connect with. And so when they're buying it for someone, it's almost like giving an inside joke that is universal.
You should always try and find a way to communicate with your audience, but especially with greeting cards because it needs to resonate with people so much more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that's really important in figuring out the design for your greeting cards is hierarchy, right? We talked about this in our lettering episode as well, how important hierarchy is and why that's so essential, especially for lettering, especially for greeting cards.
I think it's something that can easily be forgotten because that goes back to what we were talking about with extra embellishments. Sometimes you want to fill it up with all the things that you forget about making sure that that hierarchy is there.
Yeah.
Just taking a step back and making sure your message is clearly visually shown in terms of hierarchy, in terms of color and contrast. All of those things work well. And also, they also say a golden rule in greeting cards, especially, is to have your most eye-catching thing on the top of the card, because when you're in stores, it's showing that part of the card when you're seeing them in the rack. So you want to make sure that you have your really eye-catching thing that people see, because that's the only part they're going to see when they're looking at all the cards together. So a lot of times it's recommended that you put the main header message right there.
That's where it's going to end up if you're selling that physically or licensing, right? You need to have that message be very clear. Something that I'm also thinking of with hierarchy, obviously in design elements, but also with lettering specifically. I've seen so many examples of cards where the lettering is, it doesn't make sense. Like when you say it doesn't make sense. Where, for example, one word out of the sentence is way bigger. So it says happy birthday. And it's okay, but that's not how you would say it. Or get well soon. And that gets even worse when you have a longer message and the letters have lots of embellishments or some words are randomly bigger. You really need to think about what people see and what people see first. It has to make sense.
That's actually one of the things I always try to consider when I'm making one word bigger, how it'll read. For example, if you're saying wishing you a happy birthday, I'll try to make sure that the happy and the birthday, if I'm emphasizing that, is the same size, because if it's not, then it loses is emphasis. All you're seeing is if you make birthday smaller because it's a longer word, is the happy. It's not going to pop out as the birthday, which is the whole point. And you wouldn't want to make the wishing you big at all, bigger than the happy birthday, because that's not the focus of the card, at least in happy birthday card. That type of stuff, you have to look at when you're drafting the hierarchy and the composition, making sure that what you're emphasizing reads clearly and then also reads with what you're wanting to establish as the most important information to pop out.
That's a good point. If, for example, with happy birthday, that's something that goes together. So it wouldn't really make sense to have, unless it's really well done, happy in one lettering style and then birthday in a completely different lettering style. Where you have a serif or block letters and then bounce letters or something like a script, because it doesn't read well. And but you're saying emphasis, that's the word I was looking for. Think about where the emphasis is in your message.
Let's talk about color with greeting cards. One thing I've noticed is that there's really a difference between color in what's popular in the US versus what's popular in the UK. So in the US, I've noticed that more traditional colors, especially in particular for Christmas, customers seem to want more traditional green and red color combinations. Whereas it seems like, from what I've noticed in just looking online, that more non-traditional colors like pink, there's no issue. People seem to like the non-traditional colors with holiday in terms of at least what I'm thinking. Would you say that that's true from what you've noticed? Especially because you're over on that side of the world.
On the other side of the ocean, yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's, from what I've seen in the UK around the holidays, there's a bit more, there's just a lot of different colors, a lot of different options. And because people are so used to seeing the traditional, that when you do use different colors, it just really stands out. And I find that I personally also gravitate towards illustrators that use non-traditional colors. I'm thinking of, for example, is it Mary Kate McDevitt? Is that how you say her name? Do you know who I mean? Who's actually
Yeah.
from the US.
Yeah.
But actually, when I look at her festive...
She's a great lettering artist.
Yeah. When I look at her festive stuff, it very much doesn't have all traditional colors, and it just really stands out. And I think also there's a lot of different ways that you, for example, you can make stuff look festive without using traditional colors. And so there's always still a way to do that. I've also found with the collections I've made around the holidays that with using non-traditional colors, it works really well here. I'm based in Spain. It has less of a greeting card culture, but still a little bit. And the non-traditional colors stand out. It seems to work. I haven't done any kind of A/B testing, but it seems to work. As an example, when I did a little mini collection, I have one here, which was all mostly pink. Here's one of them. It's very light. I don't know if you can see it. So the whole collection was pink, like this.
Yeah.
And it works really well. I just really wanted to use pink. There's still elements, as you can see, of a little bit of green and red where it works. And you've got like the little stars and stuff. Everything is still very festive, Christmas. But the pink, I don't know, it worked as a base color. Another collection that I did, it was 6 cards, and it was partially like Christmas and in English, but I also wanted to do something that was partially Spanish, or that included the Spanish holidays. So you've got 3 kings and like chin chin for New Year's Eve, like a couple of different expressions. And because there was so much in that altogether, like so many different holidays in December, January, I didn't just want to use green and red and nothing else, because that wouldn't really work for all the holidays. So I just used a bunch of different colors, and it still seemed to be festive, so it worked. So that included, for example, this Christmas one, which is actually like a dark yellow beige, but then I combined that with...
It looked gold.
Yeah, a little bit gold, yeah, kind of. This one in blue, for example, again, not really traditional, but there's ways to make it traditional without using the colors as well. I brought that back, and then this kind of gold, yellow, and other ones. Of course, there's a pink as well in this case. So they all have slightly different themes, and I just connected them by the type of lettering, basically, and then all these little floating elements. And that was a great way to connect a bunch of holidays together, and instead of just focusing on one. And that seemed to resonate with people as well. So just an example of how, at least over here, you don't need to use traditional colors if you don't want to. There's other ways to do it as well. And the sky's the limit with greeting cards. I was also going to say one more thing before I forget. When we talked about lettering, the hierarchy part, that, for example, with this one, when you've got a slightly bigger sentence like this, 'tis the season to be jolly, if you can find a way to maybe make some words bigger, that really helps in a composition. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to make sense, but it just works to use 2 types of lettering, is what I was going to say. If you can combine 2 different ones, you can easily create a hierarchy. The same thing with these ones. I know it's mirrored, but anyway, but you've got the script lettering combined with a bigger, like a serif lettering, and that way you create a hierarchy, and that just helps to balance things out a little bit. So that's really easy to do, I find.
Also, like in your Jolly Season one, the lettering looks similar between the ones that are not emphasized and the ones that are emphasized, but the difference is the embellishment you added to the bigger ones and the coloring, of course, but it was just like a little bit of embellishment to also create more hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's actually really easy to do that. But I think really important, especially when you're working with a small size and you've got quite a bit of text. Anything more than 3 words is considered a lot of text on such a small size. So that you really have to think about what you want people to read, especially from far away, because it's important when people are picking the cards, when they're deciding what they're buying, they're not going to be able to read the whole text. So it needs to connect. Something needs to be bigger for it to draw them in, to get their attention.
One thing I was going to say about also with color in terms of non-traditional versus traditional, the portfolio building is you could always creating a piece that's more non-traditional colors, but you want to pitch it to a company that's definitely has more of a traditional slant to it. Just do another color version, and you might not want to go crazy with all the amount of color versions. You can definitely do maybe a non-traditional, maybe what you started out with, and then make a traditional one. That's something I see very often also with other surface pattern designers and how they do their portfolio. When Pantone will come out with the color of the year, I see a lot of people go back and review their portfolio and they'll revise and add new color additions based on the color of the year. A color definitely plays an important role because automatically a lot of times that stuff is with the color of the year. With Pantone, buyers are looking for things that are on trend, and just by making a simple adjustment to the color of your portfolio on certain pieces that may lend itself towards doing revisions with that color
Yeah.
could, make it more marketable.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's psychology, right? What colors are striking, what we're attracted to, it can make a huge difference. It really sets the tone of your work. And I was going to ask you, I don't know if you know this, we talked about this a little bit in the feedback episode, about certain colors that you use and what effect they have. I'm thinking, for example, when I think of the greeting cards that you've done, that you've shown me, a lot of them have a bright yellow, or those are just the ones that I remember because yellow stands out so much. What have you found what colors work well, or do you like to work with?
I actually created a color palette. What I did was I went back at one point of my portfolio and I identified colors I tended to gravitate towards, and so I made my own little sheet of color palettes. But you also, when you do that, want to make sure that you have enough variation to also include seasonal things as well. But I have noticed in general that yellow color is one I gravitate towards. And then also I really love this Adobe color. It's like this brick color. I tend to gravitate towards that as well. And this blushy color. So I've noticed the past couple years, especially, that those ones I tend to gravitate towards. I actually think I need to go back and review everything again and maybe make a new color sheet, because I think your tastes change. I think you grow, you're always growing,
of course,
as a creative, and your tastes change as well. But yeah, I think I definitely want to go back and actually refresh that whole color sheet that I've made for myself.
Yeah.
In doing that, it also made sure that my work, especially like when I did a trade show last year, that when I had to make huge banners for my booth and everything, because I used a consistent color palette and made sure that everything really went well together.
Yeah, but that's really clever, because then you're immediately showing what is your work, because you have these signature colors that you're using, or at least used for a certain period of time.
It's also a way of branding yourself, but also developing your style. People will notice if you are using the same type of colors. They'll note that your work is by the color that you use. And Elena, who we had on in our last episode talking about sketchbooks, she loves earthy colors. You can tell her work a lot of times, I think, not just she has a style, I think, but also a lot because of her color palette that she uses, which is those earthy
Yeah,
colors.
and it matches her perfectly. Yeah, the stuff that she does, it has these earthy tones. It's really nice. It's very calming. I like it.
But I would say the same is true for you in the colors that you use. I've noticed from the work I've seen. You like the pink.
Yeah, pink for sure. Yeah.
Those, they're kind of like not quite poppy art colors, but definitely on the retro side, I would say.
I love that. And when I've struggled with thinking about like what do I want to make? Well, at least I have a color palette. I know it has to be pink in it. There just has to be. I said the same thing in my Skillshare course about making greeting cards, which is more a focus on just like the visual side of it. I told people as like a challenge, if this is about making festive greeting cards, try to do it in non-traditional colors. Try that as a challenge. If you can, do it with pink, with blue, whatever you could think of, something non-traditional, and see how it goes. And I love doing that, finding like these 60s or 70s color palettes and using that, for example, in a festive setting as a challenge. And yeah, color is a great way to use as a way to develop your personal style. We talked a bit about portfolio, about trends, about how to get started, what sort of things people can focus on. Is there anything else that you wanted to end the episode?
I just think that next time we're probably going to talk more about the selling and marketing of greeting cards.
A little bit more in-depth about licensing, print on demand, all that kind of stuff to get into greeting cards a bit more.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Stay tuned for the next episode. And that's a wrap.
Yay!